Welcome to today's Homeowner with Danny Lipford. Expert advice on improving your home from the pages of today's Homeowner magazine and professional remodeler Danny Lipford.
Well, we're back at a project we've been following over the past few weeks that involves adding a large master bedroom to the rear of this house, as well as an addition that will enlarge the existing eating area, kitchen, and great room. Now, while we're here, we're also replacing some of the wood columns on the front of the house with a new fiberglass column. And we're taking care of some last-minute preparations on the rear of the house so that the brick masons can complete their work. Also, the drywall installers are in the process of finishing up all of the interior walls. And while the yard is a little bit disturbed, the homeowners have decided to take advantage of that and bring in a tree surgeon to do some trimming around the perimeter of the house. We've got a lot for you to see in this week's show, so stay with us. Well, you can see they've been able to install some of the fiberglass columns. Now, down on the end, originally, there were two columns there. They're replacing it with just one that's a little larger just to kind of simplify the front of the house. But the fiberglass columns work great, and the reason we're replacing them is all the columns had similar damage as we have here. Now, this is just water damage from all of the rain that has been dripping off the edge of the roof and splashing back onto this area. And something that's really complicating this even more is how the landscaping and the plants are growing up against the column. Now, if you have this situation at your house, you need to get out there and really trim these bushes back real generously to keep there from being any of them pressing up against that, because once it gets wet, it stays wet a long time, and the results are what you see here. Now, to replace this column, basically what they've done is they've marked the top of the existing column so that the new column will go back in the same position. Then they've put in a 4x4 post here and a small 2-ton jack just to raise the column. You can see it starting to move here a little bit. This will give them a little bit of working room as well as support it while the column's being replaced. Now, the fiberglass columns are great for this type of use because they're able to be a structural component and really support everything well, and you won't have to worry about any water damage or termite damage later on. Now, these particular columns that they're putting in are 8-inch columns, and they'll be using a base that's fiberglass as well that actually slips around the base of the column and allows you to put the column in and then slide these in place. Then later we can use a little bit of a good quality caulking or sealant to go ahead and seal around those. Now, of course, if these were lucky here, these were perfect size, we really didn't even have to cut them at all. But if you have to cut a fiberglass column, it's very easy with just a standard handsaw or a circular saw. Makes the job even easier. Now, while they're positioning this column, we'll take a look at some of the work that's being done on the inside involving the sheetrock installation. And when the drywall starts being installed, it really starts taking on a more completed appearance here on the inside of the house. But before the drywall was installed, several areas required a fair amount of prep work, such as this wall. Now, this is the original plaster in the house. It's about 3/4 of an inch thick. And on this particular wall, we decided to go over it and actually apply the drywall over this interior wall. You can see the foreman actually wrote him a few notes here. But before we were able to do that, the lower part that had no plaster on it had to be furred out. So we used some 3/4 inch 1x4 to really flush this out. Now, you can see some of the old plaster from the original walls here, and you know, that's a very labor-intensive way of providing an interior wall, and that's why it's rarely used anymore. Now, in this case, it was more feasible to go over the plaster. In the next room, we decided to join the plaster. Now, the original plaster walls in the living room and dining room are in real good shape, so we really didn't want to install drywall over the entire wall. But we had a few voids in the wall like this where we removed some wood wainscoting here in the dining room. Now, in order to fill this void, we had a little challenge in that the drywall is only a 1/2 inch thick, the plaster is 3/4 inch thick. So before we installed it, we had to put in some wood furring strips that were 1/4 inch thick. They were nailed directly to the wood stud, which allowed us to end up with a good flush surface between the drywall and the plaster. This will be real easy for the drywall finisher to apply his joint compound and his tape to get a good smooth surface. Now also he'll have a big challenge in trying to match up the sandy texture. So in his last coat that he applies, he'll be rolling on some sandy finish to simulate this same look. If not, you'll end up with a nice smooth wall here, a textured wall here. It'll really show up real bad once it's painted. Now another thing that's inevitable in a remodeling project like this, where you're doing a lot of electrical wiring, you'll end up with a few little small holes in the wall here and there. In order to take care of these, the drywall finisher will use what he calls a hot patch. Now here on the foyer wall, we originally had a double switch box that had to be removed. Since we were changing out the front door, it made this very awkward for a location for the switches. Now to patch this, there's several ways. One way we're using is called a hot patch. What we've done here is taken a piece of drywall and cut it several inches larger than the actual hole. Then we turned it over and cut a section of it the exact size of the hole. Then we broke away the rest of the drywall, leaving just the paper. Now the finisher will be able to come in, apply his joint compound around it, push that into place, more compound around the perimeter, and after a little bit of sanding, a little texturing, you'll never know there was ever a hole there. Now after our simple solution segment, I'll show you more about this remodeling project and the interior drywall finish.
Get ready to review your fix-it list as Danny and home repair pro Alan Lyle show you this week's simple solution.
You know, many times homeowners will start out to do a simple plumbing repair and end up scarring the finish on the plumbing fixture, and that costs a lot more money to repair that. Alan, I know you have a little trick and method of removing the tub spout that is virtually scratch-free.
That's right. First of all, keep in mind that most faucets are threaded on, so it's just a matter of unscrewing it. But you want to check, first of all, underneath, on some faucet, there's a little set screw. In fact, just like we have here on the handles. This one does not have one, so what we're going to do is use a dowel rod, or you may have an old mop handle that you don't need. Just cut about anywhere from 12 to 15 inches off the end of it, and this is going to be what you use for leverage. We'll put that right into the faucet itself through the spout and use that, turning it counterclockwise, and that faucet will come right off.
Now one of the reasons that you may be wanting to replace this is to change the finish on the tub spout, or you may have a problem with leakage in behind it, which can really cause a lot of water damage behind the tub. This is a good method to do it. Now, Alan, I know that years ago people were changing their shower heads out to the shower massages, and I saw a lot of damage with that.
That's right. I tell you, the most common mistake that people make is by using some pliers that have, well, they have teeth on them, and that's what scratches them up. But if you look closely at that faucet or that shower head, you can see some flat areas on there. So what we're going to do is just take a little bit of tape, wrap it around. That's just an added precaution. And instead of pliers, we're going to use either an open-ended wrench or an adjustable wrench. Set that in place, and it'll come right off without damaging the shower head.
Plumbing repairs are almost all the same, is that you really need to take your time when you're replacing anything like this to keep from scratching the finish. Some of these tricks that Alan just showed us will help you a lot in saving that finish and saving you money as well. Here in the great room and in the adjacent room, which is the kitchen, are the only rooms that the drywall installers have not completed. We're using this opportunity to install some caulking around all of the windows. We're filling in the area between the actual frame of the window and the jamb. Now this really helps to prevent any air infiltration around the windows, which can really save you a lot of money on your energy cost. You know, it's been estimated if you were able to combine all of the cracks in an average house, it will equal a 3-foot by 3-foot window left open all the time. So you can see the importance of really sealing up these areas any chance that you have. Now once the drywallers get back in here, they'll be placing some drywall around and wrapping all of the windows like this with drywall instead of wood. You can do it with wood, but the homeowners preferred a more streamlined look with using the drywall. Now this outside wall, of course, receives insulation in it. It's an R11 insulation, which is 3.5 inches wide or thick, which is the same width as the wall cavity. Now the wall between this room and the kitchen also has received some insulation. Now the reason this interior wall has insulation is for soundproofing. You know, a kitchen like this can get fairly loud when you're preparing a meal. This will prevent any of the noise from entering in to the great room that's adjacent to us. On the other hand, on this wall in the great room will be a large entertainment center. It'll have a large big screen TV, a loud sound system, and this will prevent any of the noise from filtering back into the kitchen. Now this is a great idea when you're building or remodeling a house to consider wrapping rooms such as laundry rooms, game rooms, playrooms with soundproofing to really help the acoustic quality of the house. Actually, it's fairly inexpensive. This cost about $75 extra to have this wall completed. It's about 20 feet long, it's about 8 feet tall. Now the drywall work is moving along real well, and the master bedroom, including the recessed ceiling, has all been completed and is waiting for the finishers to arrive. Also, the master bathroom is complete, and you may notice how we've used a lot of green rock or moisture resistant drywall in these areas, which is mandatory anytime you have an area that is prone to a little wetness, as in a bathroom, or if you're installing ceramic tile or cultured marble, this is a good backing for that material. Now, you know, it's not easy installing drywall. Each sheet that's 4 by 12 weighs about 100 pounds. You start out by taking some good measurements and transferring that to the drywall itself, and usually marking is done with a razor knife. Then using a T-square, you're able to keep the cuts good and square, and you just score the front of the drywall, and then by bending it you're able to break the drywall. Then using the same razor knife you're able to cut the paper from the back. Then it's time to start the hard part of it in installing the drywall. Now installing the drywall can be done with either nails or screws, but the most important part is to really hold it tight against the wall or the ceiling, and then when you're nailing or installing the screws, to provide just a little recess in the paper face of the drywall so that when the finisher is on the project, he has a little room for joint compound to go. Now once all of that's completed, you're able to cut around the doors and the windows, and also around any of your outlets, which is generally done by using just a simple small router. Now, after all of the drywall is complete, you're able to come back and wrap the returns around the windows, and then we're ready for the finishers to move in and start applying their joint compound. Stay with us. Next is this week's Best New Product.
It's time to check out the Home Center for this week's Best New Product with Danny and today's Homeowner Magazine's Editor-in-Chief, Paul Spring.
Now, Paul, as a remodeler, I get involved with a lot of kitchen remodeling, and almost every kitchen, the homeowner wants some under-cabinet lights for task lighting. The fluorescent lights cause us some problems occasionally with the sound of the ballast. That's not a very popular sound, and I understand you have a unit here that's not a problem.
That's exactly right, Danny, and the reason is this is a halogen under cabinet light. You can see the same very thin profile, about an inch. It can be tucked right up under the cabinets, but as you can see, it uses halogen bulbs, not fluorescent. Now these are very efficient. These are 25-watt lamps, which give you about the same wattage as a 60-watt bulb that you're used to in incandescent.
Okay, now this is a baked white finish, but available in a lot of other colors.
You bet. It comes both in brass and in black, and it's priced out according to the number of lights. So a one light unit from Westech, who makes this, is about $39, $49 for a 2-light, and $59 for a 3-line.
Okay, I see the wire on it here, so that it can be plugged directly into a wall outlet, but also it can be hardwired to where you can use a wall switch.
Exactly right. So if you're in a remodeling situation, go ahead and hardwire it, but it's a good Saturday afternoon project that can be plugged right in. And there's another nice feature to it. It has 2 levels of lighting, essentially dimmable.
That's great. Well, there's a lot of ways you can use this around your house, including over a desk area, a closet, and a lot of other ways. Now, earlier in the day, the homeowners had a tree surgeon out to handle cutting some of the large limbs up at the top of this large oak tree. Now, they had the right equipment with a large boom truck that enabled them to somewhat effortlessly access the upper part of this tree. After cutting these large limbs and lowering them down, they fed them through a chipper that allowed them to carry a lot of limbs in a small amount of space. You know, they wanted to get most of the limbs out of the way and some of the dead limbs from away from all of the trees and out of the backyard, because they'll be starting their landscaping real soon. Now, obviously the activity here is with all of the brick masons that are in the process of putting up some of the last few bricks that we have. Now, a lot of these are bricks that we salvaged during the early part of the job. They were cleaned, stacked, and now we were able to reuse them so that we get a real good blend of the old and the new brick. Now, bricks are mostly just a covering. They're really not of any kind of structural significance other than some of the areas that we're dealing with, like you see here. Now, they're in the process of installing a brick lintel or an angle iron that will support the bricks over these large openings. Now, this opening is about 12 foot wide, and the angle iron itself is over 14 feet. Now, it'll sit on either end on the actual bricks, and we'll support it well, but we're adding the lag bolts that go into the header that's part of the framing so that it'll keep that angle iron from turning out. You know, more and more people are putting a lot of emphasis on their pets these days in a lot of the projects that we do. You can see the little doggy door here that we've installed, and later we'll be putting some flaps on this so that the dog can come and go as he pleases. Now, you know, protection of the windows that have to be installed before the brick mason starts is real important. And here we've installed some 6mm plastic, and we've cut slits in the lower part of it to allow some ventilation and air to flow in and out of the house. Let's take a look at how the old bricks meet the new. Now, by looking at the color of the mortar of the old and the new mortar, you may be thinking it's really not a good match. But actually, this mortar is still very wet, and as a result, it's much darker than it'll be once it dries. Also, this mortar has had the advantage of Mother Nature working on it for 30 years with the sun and the rain bleaching this mortar, and this will look the same after a few months being out in the sun. Now, to show you how much this has changed and how much the weather will work on the mortar, this is a piece of mortar that we found behind the brick that shows you how dark it was when it was installed and what a contrast and a difference the weather can make on it. Now, the most important thing in a tie-in like this with a brick wall is that you use the right bricks and the right size bricks. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, we were able to salvage a lot of the original bricks that we used and mixed in. And once the face of these bricks are good and clean after a good acid washing, this will really blend in great. Now, you know, this is important, any tie-in that you have, and if you have the advantage of using old bricks like this, and you have good brick masons that can really match out all of the rake joints and the look of the mortar and the method of laying, all of these things are real important to tie things in, just as well as a good tie-in on the overhang with your fascia and your soffit. All of these elements really make for a better job, and the best compliment is maybe your neighbor can't tell where you started and where you ended on the remodeling.
Now for a bit of news from the great outdoors as Danny takes a look around the yard.
Now, when pruning healthy branches to shape trees and shrubs and roses, making the right cut in the right place encourages desirable new growth along the branches. Trim a healthy branch back to another healthy branch or a dormant bud. Also, when cutting to a bud, choose one that points outward. That way, the branch the bud produces will grow out from the trunk or main stems rather than inward where it may cross other branches. Now, when pruning back to a bud, use hand pruners with scissor-style bypass blades to make a clean, close cut. Now, cutting just above the bud, the cut should slope upward in the same direction as the bud. Now, incorrect cuts include those that are too close to the bud, too sloped, and too far away from the bud. Now, with these proper pruning techniques, not only will you have a healthier plant, but a much more attractive one as well. Well, another show's complete and another great week of progress. You know, we started this job only 5 weeks ago, and we've already completed installation of the drywall. Now, next week it's trim time with the installation of all of the wood panel doors, as well as base molding, crown molding, and I'll show you how to organize those closets using simple wooden shelf boards. I hope to see you next week here on Today's Homeowner.